Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, good night, everybody. Whatever time it is, I hope it is good. We're here with a really, an interesting tutorial, perhaps. We're going to get into some really cool stuff here. If you're familiar with After Effects, and you're familiar with another tool called Particular, then you'll probably recognize a very famous tutorial by a guy named Andrew Kramer over there at videocopilot.net, where a long time ago, because Andrew really is just one of the old school dudes, he shows you how to sort of make these light streaks using Trapcode's Particular. Now, if you're like me, in the present age, you're getting a little tired of every single thing being a subscription model, and Trapcode Particular is now sort of bundled with a bunch of stuff. You do get a lot of things when you subscribe, but it's not cheap anymore. And there just comes a time where you're like, all right, I just need everything to relax. I don't want to spend, $200 a month on subscription services. So I went out and I looked for some other programs that might do the same thing, that I could just buy once and just own it. And I found another program called Stardust. And Stardust is an absolutely fantastic plugin tool that does pretty much everything that Particular does, plus 300 other things. I cannot recommend Stardust. I just can't recommend it enough, to be honest with you. It is vastly superior to the current versions of Particular. There is one downside, and that is Particular, because it doesn't have a bunch of features. It's a little bit easier to understand, whereas, a little bit doesn't quite cover it. Particular is a lot easier to get into. Stardust is very complicated. It has a lot more in common with Houdini, if you're familiar with Houdini, than it does Particular. Also, Particular, under some circumstances, runs a little bit better. But again, I think it's because there's not a lot of extra stuff happening in Particular, whereas there is a lot of extra stuff in Stardust. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to be recreating this example here. And so let's just go ahead and stop that. We'll go over to Project. We'll create a new composition. We'll call this Tutorial. And I'm going to show you a couple different ways of doing this. The first one is the way I'm going to show you first is the way that we're going to be focusing on. And then after that, I'll show you a whole different way, which is not as efficient, but it has some really cool implications to it. So here we are. I'm going to hit Control-Y to bring up a brand new solid. And we're going to call this, I like to just call them what they are, BG ramp. And then I'm using Video Copilot's, I think it's called the Command Console. I believe that's what it's called. If we go here, what comes up? The Video Copilot, let's see, we're going to give him a really quick, maybe a shout out if we can find the actual tool here. All right, well, I think it's called the Command Console. You can just go to videocopilot.net. Always support Andrew. Andrew is amazing. So we're using the Command Console, which all you have to do is hit Control and then your space bar. And then at your mouse comes this this FX console. Maybe that's what it's called, FX console. Look that up. Okay, and I'm going to type in ramp, and here comes gradient ramp. We're going to go like that. We'll go over to the effects panel here, and we will pick just something like I'm a big fan of sort of these, oops, if I can click without like these dark teals. So we'll click that. And then I'm not a big fan of super black anymore. I like things to have a little less contrast, so we're going to go with just a slight gray. I'm going to swap those colors, say radial. I'm going to drag 1 point over here, drag 1 point down here, and there we go. We just have a nice gradient background. Excellent. The next thing we're going to do is actually create our texture for our swoopity. And you'll understand what I mean here in just a second. So if we go over here and we say new composition, and I'm just right-clicking over here, right-click, new composition, I'm just going to create one that's like 250 by 250. And we're going to call this tutorial streak. And there it is. And again, we're going to hit Control-Y for a brand new background. And we're just going to, we have a blue selected. Just go ahead and select any color that you like. We'll just stick with that blue for now. And if you're interested in where that blue is, it's about here, about there. So there it is. There's our blue. And now we're just going to grab our pen tool. And I've got Roto Bezier on. Now this might be something that's kind of cool. If you have this turned off and you start clicking, you start getting a lot of really straight lines. Right? So if we look at that, that is a very hard-edged shape. But if we undo all those, click, 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 undo, and we grab the pin tool and we turn Roto Bezier on, watch this. You actually get these really nice sort of augmented curves here. So what we're going to do is kind of create a, sort of like a weird demented E. Something like that. And then I'm going to grab the ellipse tool. I'm just going to make a few of these types of things. And you'll see what's going on here in a second. There are reasons for all this. So there we go. I mean, that's what we got. It looks like, I don't know what it looks like, but it's frightening. Okay, so then let's go back to our tutorial comp, and we'll take our tutorial streak, and we're going to drop that in here. And it just so happens that the tutorial streak is 20 seconds long. I'm going to get into something here in a second. It doesn't have to be 20 seconds long. Actually, what we'll do is we're going to change that. Let's change that to like 5 seconds. All right, so there's our tutorial streak. It's now 5 seconds long. There is a reason. We'll get into that in a second. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to hit Y. Actually, before we do that, let's go ahead. This is a very important part. In fact, in some ways, this is the most important part, okay? So we're going to say new light. And we're going to have it be a point light. Again, the color, I don't think the color matters too much here. This actually doesn't matter either. The intensity, you just turn that, I'm turning it to 0 because I just don't want, if for some reason we put a 3D like floor or any sort of 3D objects, we don't want this light to influence the scene in terms of actual light. It's a guide, and you'll see what I mean here in just a second. So we'll say yes, hit OK. So here's our light. And then if you click up here to the position, you'll see that your gizmos change, so you can sort of drag your light kind of in a more normal 2D direction or in an X, Y, and even a Z if you wanted to. And now we're going to start to animate this guy, and we're going to animate him the following way. I'm just going to start kind of here, and I've turned on my scene guides right here. It just kind of helps you see where things are positioned, because we're going to create a little shape here. So I just created a keyframe, and I'm going to go out 1 second, and I'm going to drag that like that. I'm going to go out 2 seconds. I'm going to bring him down something like that. Go out a second, bring him like that, go out a second, going up, go out 2 seconds, come down like that, and then I'm actually going to copy the first frame and paste him 1 more second out. So now, we basically have this figure 8 shape. Now we got to clean it up a little bit. He's messy, but you do have these drag handles. And what I would always suggest is drag your handles so that way they're kind of they're parallel or perpendicular to sort of they're more parallel to the direction that things are generally heading. So when things are sort of heading left to right, try to smooth out your handles so they are also kind of left to right. Another thing you're looking for, well, I'll show you here in a second, but this is actually kind of important. And I don't know if anybody's ever talked about this before, but if you look really closely, you'll see that your lines kind of have these stair steps, these delineations. And you'll notice that these are sort of tight together, and then these are almost twice as much spaced apart. What you would like in order to have truly even motion is to make it so that way you have the same amount of steps or that those little delineations are kind of evenly spaced out. If you can do that, you're going to end up with a lot more even motion from point A to B. And that's a lot better just like that. And we'll just again just sort of even that out like that. that. Come down to this guy here. And that's pretty good. So if we play this, well, you can't see it, but if we scrub through it, you can see that's pretty good. That's pretty good. And what we'll do is we'll just go ahead and copy all those. I'm going to go to the last frame and paste, and then go to the last frame again and paste. And so now we have basically just this loop. Okay? So that is very important. I'm going to rename this light, and we're just going to call it emit. Why? Why not? It can be named anything you want it to be. That doesn't matter yet. It doesn't matter at all, honestly. It's really just for you to keep track, especially if you have multiple particle systems and you need each one to be influenced by a different light. That's why you would name your lights. So the next thing we're going to do, Control Y. I'm going to call this Stardust because that is the name of the plugin, and I can keep track of it. I now know where the Stardust plugin is. And then we're going to use our FX console to, not Starfust, Stardust. And oh boy, things are going to look, if you're not familiar with Stardust, things are going to look a little crazy. Like instantly we have over here to the left, we have something that looks very particular-ish. Like you can pretty much see things that remind you of particular. But then you've also got a node system over here. And node systems are very powerful, but they're also very, very complicated. And if you've seen any of the tutorials for Stardust, there's a lot of times where by the time people are done and they show you their node tree, you're like, how did you even discover that? Like, you know, luckily we're not going to be, the two default things, we can stick with those. We don't have to mess with anything else for this tutorial. We're just going to be using these two. In fact, we probably won't even be looking at the node tree at all. What we're going to be looking at is this tree over here a lot. So the first thing we're going to do, we've got our light here, and we've got our particles just sort of emitting here from the middle, like that. And again, that's very particular, but it's not. It's Stardust, I promise you. We're going to be changing this to light. Boom. And then right here, where it says starting with, for some reason there's a drop down, a fly out. Again, it's, you know, programs that are designed by engineers. What can you say? I'm going to change that to emit. And absolutely nothing happens at all. And it might actually, it's not because of this, is it? It is because of that. Okay, so what did we just learn? We learned that in this particular instance, well, what happens if I turn that up to, like, just out of curiosity, to 900? Does anything happen? No. What happens if we turn it to 50? It literally reduces the amount. So it basically, this is, the intensity strength is a division tool or a subtraction tool for how many particles you have coming out. So we've just fixed our light. Our light is now emitting 100% of the particles we're asking it to. And you'll notice now that we've set it to light, it also does kind of a little Disney dance here, right? This is very, you know, if you wish upon a star. And he's just flying. The performance isn't too bad either. Everything's kind of moving pretty fast. But there's some things that we want to change. The first thing we want to change is we want to, there's a thing here called speed. And I think this is called velocity in particular. And if we change this to 0, the same thing's going to happen. We just get a line of particles now. And that line of particles is influenced by the life of the particles. And you know, one thing I'm going to do real quick here is I'm just going to go and clean up they look pretty good actually. I'm not gonna clean it up. It's all good. Or maybe I will clean it up. Where's this guy at? He needs to be more like that. There we go. That'll just smooth that edge out a little bit there. We want it to be as smooth as possible. It does make a difference. There we go. Way, 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 way better. Okay. So now we've got this sort of, this thing happening. It's just emitting a particle, and that should be very similar to particular. The next thing that we can do, obviously, is change what I guess I should talk about these menus real quick. You've got, because it's a node-based tool, you've got these two nodes here. You have an emitter and a particle, and you'll notice that when I click up here, it selects the emitter over here in the effects panel, and if I click particle here, it'll select the particle. And that is a little bit, it can be a little confusing, but it is nice in terms that you can then sort of like close particular panels so you can sort of focus on one and not the other. You know, like once you sort of get done setting this stuff up, you can kind of just get away from it for a few, just close that up like that, come back over here, and then focus on your particles. One of the things that we will do is that we will change our particle from a circle to a texture, and then we will select our tutorial streak. And I'm also going to say loop, and you can see here it is. Let's make it a little bit bigger because it's very small right now. We're going to take this up to like 100, I think, for right now. There it is. The next thing that we'll do is we will change its overall opacity. You can change the opacity inside of here, but you can also change it. I think it's better to change it in the particle system itself because you don't have to keep opening up a subcomp and all that kind of stuff. So we'll change the opacity way down. We're gonna like 5. There we go, see? Instantly looking good. And then for transfer mode, we'll say add. And add will kind of just give us a little bit of those really cool sort of like, you know, with the streaks sort of intersect or come over top of each other. And the interesting thing about this is, even though our shape is sort of this weird E, what you can see is happening is that weird shape kind of gives us really cool sort of overlays and interactions. And even though our shape doesn't look all that complicated, once you see it rendered out here, it has a really neat sort of look to it. The one thing that we can do is, you can tell it sort of is a little boxy because the shape of the E is itself boxy. So we can fix that. What we just need to do is sort of change the size and the opacity of our beginning and end points, and that'll just even that out. It'll sort of smooth over that illusion that's not so good. So here under particle we have something called overlife, and it just so happens we both have a opacity and a size. This is very similar to particular. It does work a little bit different. I think it actually works a little bit better. If you've ever tried to draw in the particular one, it is really, really janky. This one is a lot nicer. What you're going to do is you're going to hit where it says linear. You're going to click that so it says Bezier. And when you've got 3 points, not really a whole lot changes. Now you can see that it goes like from tiny to big to tiny, but there's no smooth curves. It's not until you put in a 4th curve that you then get a true Bezier, and you can see how much that's smoothed out. And then we can actually take a 5th curve and sharpen up that leading edge quite a bit. And we can, whoops, don't need that many. We just need like something like that, right? And then as it plays, you can see now you get that what we're more or less aiming for, which is sort of like a nice sort of berth at the front. And then you can sort of, that looks really cool. And then we can also do the same for the opacity. And you know, the opacity doesn't have to be a Bezier if you don't want it to be. And that just, you know, it really kind of gives it that really cool ghosty feel. And now, like instantly, we could end this tutorial here because that's basically all the things that you need to have this thing happen. Now, we're gonna mess around with it a little bit more so we can make it look even cooler. We're gonna give it like a life of 4, and we're gonna go back up to this emitter node. I'm gonna change the particles per second to like 200. And that just sort of fills in some of the gaps. We no longer have like that heavy stair step look to it. It brightens it up a little bit. That's why we had turned that opacity all the way down to 3. And now we're really, really, really close to this just looking super awesome. And the other cool thing about this is 3D. You know, this is like true factual 3D. And it's really, really cool. And we could drag you know, just to sort of prove that fact, if we were to come in here, and we'll just say new, and you can right click anywhere to get the menu, and this is how I usually get around. Right click, say new camera. We'll just go with the default 50 mil. And if I take this camera and I rotate it, you can see, you know, we're on the plane, so we're kind of looking down at a flat 2D sprite. Remember, this is a 2D sprite sort of being projected onto a 3D surface, but we do have the ability to sort of like move around, and you can also change the direction for your sprites. But the real strength for things like this is the fact that you can do the following. If we go to, like, say 4 views here, and we come up to our emitter, and maybe let's hit U, and maybe like we'll grab this guy here, oh, we want top. Let's go to the right. Let's do this in the right place here. So there we go. This is going to be a little bit better. So now I can kind of get in here and really sort of create an actual shape. Right? You can see there's like there is literal literal depth to our lights now, and when it animates, it will animate in that 3D space, and that means cool things like being able to take your camera and being able to sort of like move in and out of these 3D spaces. And so you can do all types of cool moves where you can kind of come in and out of the shapes, things like that. You know, just really cool, nifty things. So let's undo that. Let's go back to where we were, and we'll get rid of our camera here. So we're back to where we were. But this is sort of like this is the easiest way to kind of get what we want here with the shape. Now, the other thing that you can do with the shape to make it a little bit more dynamic is, if you go back to Stardust, there is some rotation properties. And I'm going to change, we want the Z rotation to change, like maybe like 20. And now watch the shape here. See how it starts to twist? And now you really kind of get a cool effect where you can actually see the sprite twisting there, and it continues to twist through its birth, and it just sort of follows, and now you've got just a really cool sort of ghosty tendril, you know, and you can see it twisting through the curves, and it now just has all these really cool shapes to it, and it comes around. I mean, it's just so cool. It's just so cool to have options like this. So that's kind of how you do this sort of shape, this very specific, this old school shape. And if you remember in Mr. Andrew Kramer's first tutorial, what he didn't do a shape like this, he did something more like this. He just took a light here in the middle, kind of went like that, and then just said wiggle. Whoops, if I can spell wiggle right, wiggle. And then I think he did something like 10, and then we'll say 500. I don't think it was 10. Maybe it was like 0.5. There we go. And you can see we can actually create that exact same tutorial that he once had, where it just kind of sort of follows this random, and look how cool that is, like where it's spiraling towards us. This is so cool. I mean, this is like the awesome part of this program. It is fantastic. Now, this computer that I'm running this on is insanely powerful, and you can see that it's not the world's fastest rendering engine at all. Now, they do have some tools in here to make that a little bit better for you. You know, they have some, like, you can sort of change the draft qualities so things render a little bit quicker in the draft. But you know what we could also do? We could also apparently turn down the intensity probably to 25. And then, you know, then you can sort of get a much quicker sort of draft idea of what your shape is going to at least look like, right? So there we go. So let's undo these, and we'll go back to our figure 8. But then I wanted to show you this other kind of option that doesn't work as good, but it's important to know it, okay? I just said snow it, but you'll understand. We'll create a new composition. We're going to call this tutorial spline. And I'm going to change that composition so that way it's actually 1920 by 1080. And then we'll just copy our gradient ramp and our tutorial streak from our other guy. Just paste them in here. And then I'm not going to copy the light. Instead, we're going to do the following. This is going to be kind of weird, but check it out. We're going to say new light, same as before. Light. It is actually important that this is at 0 this time. I promise. We're going to call this spline. And here is our light. Maybe where is our light? I feel like our light is missing. Okay, there we go. Sometimes the lights are, they just do their own thing. It's because we started off like in, we changed the composition size. So yeah, anyway, fun times. We're gonna change this down to 0. And so we have this light right here. And what we're gonna do the same thing as before. We're gonna change it to the just the position. And then I'm gonna kind of do the same thing that we had. I'm gonna leave that guy right there in the middle actually. And I'm gonna duplicate. And I do that by hitting Control D. And then I'm going to drag this one here. And then I'm going to duplicate it. And I'm going to drag this one here. And then I'm going to duplicate it. And I'm going to drag this guy here. And then I'm going to duplicate it. And I'm going to drag this guy about like that. I'm going to duplicate it, drag this guy about like that. I'm going to duplicate it, drag this guy about like that. So now we have, you know what? Actually, we have to fix something here real quick. I hate to do this, but we've got to. Because we started out at such a weird size, everything's a little zoinky. So there we go. This will be 100% better. So let's paste this guy in here. New light. He's in the right spot. We're in the right position. Everything is good. All right. So we're just going to start all over again. Again, we're going to name it spline. I know we're doing it again. Trust me. This is better in the long run. Duplicate it. Drag him up there, duplicate it, drag him up there, duplicate it, drag him down here, duplicate this, coming up to this top corner here, trying to match as best as I can, duplicate. All right, so if you look, the way that I sort of built these things, I drew it like this. So we kind of have that, you know, infinity symbol, whoopsie, that infinity symbol roughly mapped out in our lights. We're going to take our first light, I'm going to duplicate it, drag it to the top of the stack. So now we have 8. And spline 1, we'll just call him spline 1. Spline 1 and 8 are in the exact same positions, okay? So that means it's time for Stardust. So there's Stardust. And just like before, if we hit play, it's just puking out in the middle. But if up here, where it says emitting, well, I'm sorry, where it says point, if we change this to spline, and I'm just going to change the name here to the name of the light, which is also spline, you'll notice something interesting. You'll notice that it emits in the shape of an infinity symbol, what's happening here is that it is using these lights as sort of a spline shape. So if you think of these as vertices, it's using these as the vertices for a spline. And remember how I set the intensity down to 0? Well, if we come up to this guy here, light number 2, and I drag this intensity all the way up to, say, like 1,000 or 500, notice how it now becomes like a hard edge. It is attracted to it. It's basically like getting rid of the Bezier curve, right? So we're gonna leave that for 0 because we want it to be smooth. But that's what intensity does when you use the spline method. Before we were using the light method. We're not using the light method though. We're using the spline method this time around. So turn that back to spline. And then what a lot of people do is they say set that to once. We're actually going to set ours to sequence. I'll show you here in a second. Oh, actually, I don't have to show you. Look at that. See what's happening here? Does this look kind of familiar to what we were just doing back at our other? And then, of course, if we turn the speed down to 0, we know exactly what's going to happen. Pretty cool. And then we can turn the life down to like 0.5 maybe. Yeah, we get more of a chase now. Now there is a problem. The problem is like if we go over here to particle and we turn this to textured and we change this to tutorial streak and we'll bump up the size just like we did before. We were working at about like I think it was like 100 before. We'll go with 100 again, and we'll go with 60. Obviously, there's a bit of a problem. How do we smooth this out so it looks good? Well, the first thing we're going to do, because we know we're going to do it sooner or later, we'll change the opacity down to like 3 again. It's really, really, really light. What happens if we turn up the particles per second? Let's turn it up to like 500. Not really anything kind of happened there. In fact, whatever did happen doesn't really make sense. Well, what happens, just out of curiosity, what if we turn it down to 1? Well, we see 1, and he's sort of marching across that line. Okay, let's go back to 100. So what do we do here? How do we... I should turn the opacity back up just for now. I think right now it's kind of hard to tell what we're doing. So how do we increase the resolution? Because every time we change this, it's adding more particles on top of existing particles. It's not filling in the spaces between. Well, here we've got something because we're using a spline and a path, or a spline is technically a path. Down here, if I close all these flyouts, I'll just close the emitter one and we'll just focus on the particle. Down here under particle, you'll see there's something called path properties. Let's open that up. Is it there? Is it up here? Maybe it's up here. Oh my god, this is where things get really confusing. It's under the emitter. Under the emitter, there's something called path properties, and that makes sense because we're telling the emitter to be a spline. Under the emitter, there's a path properties. Click on that, and here you see spline samples. Now, this is where things get interesting. If we turn this to 50, we will remove half of these. There we go, we've spread them out. If we change it to 200, we will have doubled it. Interesting. Not only have we doubled it, but because we've doubled it, it's set the amount of particles to fit that space. What we really want is probably something close to 1,000. Ah, yes. This is beginning to look more familiar. In fact, what happens now if we say, like, I don't know, change the particles to 500? Interesting, interesting. Maybe now we change these the opacity down to like 3. That's, again, just looking more and more familiar. And then change that to add. All right. Maybe change the amount of particles to 1,000. Well, it's interesting. It seems to just make it kind of longer, doesn't it? What if we change the path samples to like 2,000? There we go. Now we have a much more smoother thing. But look at this. Look how much slower it's gotten. I mean, it gets a whole lot slower. Well, Actually, it's not incredibly much slower, is it? It's pretty similar. But can we make this? Can we do the same in both of these guys? Well, let's find out. The first thing we need to do is see if we can change the size, and that's going to be done over here. Remember, there's this over life tab. We'll click that. We'll click size. We're just going to do the same thing we did before, kind of like that, and you can see it's working as we expect it to. So that's very similar to what we had before, and I suspect because one thing works, I would suspect the other thing works the same. And there we go. We get that really cool ghost effect. So, man, so far, so good. The next thing that we might want to do, what happens if we change the life to like 1 second? What happens if we change the life to 2 seconds? All right. Looking good. Looking good. Look at that. And the last thing we would have to do is, I think the pixels, the size was closer to 100. And whoopsie, the last thing we would want to do is add in that rotation. So turn all those off. Rotation properties, we changed the Z to like 20. Should be the same kind of effect. It is. And then if we hit play, you can really see that we're kind of ending up with a very similar animation to what we had created in our previous file. Like here's this guy, and now they're also rendering about the exact same speed. So that's interesting to know. It's like, you can create two completely different ways of doing this. Now, in some ways, when you think about it, this is almost like a faster way of creating what we did. And the reason why it's faster is, look at how we did the lights. The lights are set up like this, right? And it's doing all the calculations. If we just stop playing, here's all of our lights. It's doing all the calculations for it. Meanwhile, in our previous tutorial, we sort of had to set up the lights. We had to, go in. It's one light, but then we had to go in and do all the keyframes for it and all the pathing for it. The nice thing about this method is that I can quickly, I can grab all of these keyframes, and then I can compress them. Sometimes, not always. You can do this. Hold on. There we go. And I'm able to compress everything, and now that light is going to move much faster across the screen, and we get a faster animation. So all I had to do was change the keyframes, and I was able to select that all at once, or I can slow it down by stretching them out like this. But if you see, like, in order to have this loop, I've got this, multiple keyframes here. If I wanted to change this guy, and I wanted to say move, one light up, where's a good light? Right here. If I wanted to move him up, well, I'm going to have to change that keyframe in multiple places. Whereas back here in this new one, all I have to do, if I want to change this, like say have this guy, I don't know, if I really wanted to be weird and I wanted this guy to kind of come in, you'll see it loops infinitely, but also that shape is now updated. I can put this light anywhere I want to. I can kind of have it double back, and it's going to create that Bezier curve automatically. I can even put a wiggle property on that light and kind of have it just sort of dance around if I wanted it to. You can also see now that this one does render a little bit slower than the other one. That's because also, if we go to compare them, we go to the Stardust, I'm using 1,000 particles a second on this guy. Let's see how many we're using on this guy. We're using 200 particles a second on this guy, on our original one. Not only are we using 1,000 particles, we're also using 2,000 spline samples, and that also ups it a lot. Like if you change that to like 10,000, it slows things down. And not only that, but it's also like kind of a weird relation. You change that to 10,000, it's going to really shorten this up. And so now you have to add more of these guys. Maybe like, I find that sort of a really easy place to start is sort of like a half-half. So if this is 10,000, this should be 5,000. And now this is probably going to render like a dog. Oh boy. Oh boy. Oh boy. Yeah, so that really sort of slows things down. But if we go to 500 and 1000 here, like this, it lightens it up. But actually, that's pretty good. You could get away with it. I think we could do that, and then we could turn the opacity, which is under particle properties here, to maybe like, let's try 9. And now, I was actually able to half that. And yeah, now it speeds up quite a bit. So you got to play with your settings a little bit, but that's really good. That's really good. Everything there looks really nifty. So there you guys go. I just showed you how to do 2 of the exact same things as particular. So if you're used to particular and you're going to move to Stardust and you're wondering, well, how do I do some of the things I used to do? Well, this is how. It's fairly easy. It works out great. And I hope you enjoy it. And if you like this tutorial, I guess if that's what you want to call it, then please go ahead and give me a like and subscribe and leave a comment. And if you hated it, go ahead and like it anyway, because the dislike button doesn't even work anymore. So use the like button to show how much you hated it, and then also leave a comment to let me know. And have a great day, everybody, and I will talk to y'all soon.